Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to our webinar this morning on Skype for Business Troubleshooting 101. And we're going to go over the key steps to an effective troubleshooting for Skype for Business UC environment. So welcome to the call. So joining me today, I'm John Hand, and I'm the Microsoft Global Alliance Director for IR. And I used to work for Microsoft for 22 years, and I've been with IR now for just about 2 years. Joining me today is Mr. Dave Bottomley. And Dave?
Hi, John. Thanks. Dave Bottomley, also an alum of Microsoft, and I'm a solution engineer with IR, and I typically carry a lot of the technical conversations for IR's prognosis suite and all the interrelated tools.
Thank you, Dave. And here's what we're going to cover today.
Yeah, so we just have a couple. Oh no, John, you wanted me to kind of.
Yeah, go for it.
well orchestrated here. So in all honesty, we want you to come back next webinar. So we're only going to give you a part of the picture today. So as some of you have heard us speak about CQM in the past, in the way that we at IR call quality management. It's in terms of server, endpoint, and also what Microsoft calls last mile, which in some instances can be equated to network. So today, John and I have decided with the short amount of time that we have, we wanted to cover how IR prognosis covers server health, a little bit about what we see in terms of metrics around endpoints, specifically conference call history, demonstrate to you our global search feature, and also the endpoint in-flight data. So this is what we hope to demonstrate today, and hopefully we'll leave you your interest peaked, and you'll join us for subsequent webinars where we go into some of the other stacks in terms of those 3 areas in terms of network and endpoint. John?
Thank you, Dave. And a little bit about IR. For those of you who join these webinars regularly, you've heard this before, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but you can certainly find more information about our company at IR.com. But we're a publicly traded company. We've been in business since 1988, so we've been around, and we've been in the monitoring business for well over 14 years now. We're now a member of the Microsoft IT Pro Tools program. So we're also an approved partner there, and we're a Microsoft Gold Communications partner. And in the United States, we're a national sponsor for the Skype for Business Users Group. You can see some of the companies that we've done business with below. And we're a market leader in UC and CC managed endpoints, so unified communications and conference center endpoints, with over 14 million managed endpoints worldwide. And you can see we're a global company. Our headquarters are actually based out of Sydney, Australia. So we have a global footprint, and that's a little bit about that. And as I mentioned, we're a part of the IT Pro Tools program, and for those of you that might not be familiar with it, it's a program that Microsoft put together to ensure that they had certified partners to work with to make sure that you have a good experience end-to-end using Skype for Business. And so we just were entered into that program last month, and we continue to add additional categories for certifications. And you'll get a copy of the slide deck at the end, and a lot of these slides are linked to specific information. And just recently, in fact, just last week, we were nominated as a Gartner Cool Vendor. And Gartner picks out vendors and gives them this cool status based on their technology. And we were selected for our innovative method of uniquely gathering information specifically for Skype for Business. And then we're going to be able to provide that same sort of insight as the environments move from on-premise into the cloud. So again, you can read more about it once you get the slide deck. You can click there and actually go to the press release. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dave, who's going to give us a technical run-through on some of the troubleshooting features of prognosis. So Dave?
Great.
Let's go to the first
Thank you,
slide.
John. Yeah, it's just going to advance. So, whoops, you already hit one for me. We both hit forward. In any event, we talked about 3 different. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say we're a well-oiled machine this morning.
Yeah. In any event, as we mentioned previously, we're going to look at a few things here in terms of server health, which will be the first area. So essentially, some of you sat in on our CQM. Once again, I tried to assess whether our customers are impacted either by server, endpoint, or network, if you will. And typically in larger organizations, sometimes smaller ones, those are different dialogues with different support groups within the organization. So many customers say, well, gee, how would you use a tool like Prognosis to essentially parse out those three areas to assess the health of your environment? So I'm going to attempt my screen share here. And if my monitor tells me that you're seeing what I see, and please go ahead and make sure that nothing else on presenting happened. Please advise. I should be seeing it. Can someone please comment whether you're seeing my screen or not? Should be generous amount of bar charts and tabular data. Okay, John, I'm going to ask you to kind of keep your eye on the questions from the audience. So,
will do.
Without hearing it. You can see it, John?
Yes,
yes?
I can. It's
okay.
coming up on my
I'm
screen.
I'm going to go ahead and proceed.
If anyone else can't see it, just put it into the comments and we'll make sure that this gets refreshed.
Okay. So for those of you who have not had an opportunity to see Prognosis here, this is really the main UI. This is a browser-driven UI. HTML5 compliant browsers have no issue with this interface, so that would be your Chrome, Safari, Edge, or IE. But point being, 98% of our users and UC administrators work with the web UI. I want to point out here that I am working in a demo environment. Reason being is we do interact with other companies, third parties, and it probably is unfair for us to reveal that as we take you on a tour through Prognosis. So we are somewhat obligated to stay within our demo environment. I think as John and some of my colleagues have mentioned in the past, we aren't just a Skype shop. As you can see in this high-level navigation pane, we do focus on all the major UC vendors because we realize, and you'll see John's slides here towards the end of the presentation, that very few shops are really homogeneous in terms of the UC platform. We typically work with customers who have some mix of the platforms. However, we are focused on Skype for Business, and that's why I'm sitting here on the Skype for Business site overview. So one of the first things we take a look at in terms of server health as we deploy Prognosis is here in the upper left-hand frame. You can see we're on this site, Napoli. We're looking at the various server roles, AV, Director, Mediation, and so on. And you can see the number of servers we have in the pool. And then we see some high-level statistics that have been aggregated up to this summary level. So in this demo environment, we can see we have 3 systems that are just like showing some memory saturation. So I'll be honest with you, I've already pre-populated some of these because the way that Prognosis is designed is some of these displays are on demand. As you would imagine, we're pulling telemetry from a lot of different systems and a lot of different different sources, and we're committing them to our databases where there are certain displays that are only on demand. So some of these I've already gone ahead and populated these. So what I really want to show here, I think I brought up maybe the wrong set of same starting point here. So Skype for Business overview, and the reason, as I mentioned, we can drill into these various pools, and I'm going to pick the front end pool, but I've gone ahead and pulled that drill down in so we could get this on-demand data here. So this starts giving us an indication of the 4 servers that comprise that pool, and if there are performance issues with any of the individual servers that comprise the pool, this is where we start to reveal it here. And of course, we're getting some high-level Moz statistics, and of course this is a demo environment, so for some of these are going to be fairly flat. But we're also pulling all this data in terms of the WMI metrics. So this is how we pull this remotely, is through the WMI mechanism. We also have the ability to use WMI in a very similar fashion to pull from the laptops or the end tops or workstations that our end users have as well. But since the focus here is on health of the servers from the onset, this is how we begin to start drilling into. So this gives you a notion of the pool, what comprises the pool, and then how each one of those servers are performing. So similarly, I've preloaded a drill down here for front-end server number 4. So that was one of the 4 servers that comprise the front end. So now we can start assessing in terms of DB latency and so on. I'm not going to read through each of the charts. But obviously the point here is, let's get a deeper understanding of what's going on in terms of resource saturation or thresholds. And also we can drill further here on these links and pull up these metrics, which is very similar to what you'll find in Task Manager, but you're seeing things like the top processes here. So if there's a specific process that is essentially consuming all your resources, you can see how many CPUs have been allocated, somewhat light for a front end. Also the CPU utilization, and of course more metrics we pull from WMI in terms of how much physical memory and virtual memory are being consumed. And we find this extremely helpful when we have those customers who have Hyper-V or virtualized type environments where they can just quickly see, oh, we're saturated, CPUs are hitting the peak, and it's very easy for us to allocate some additional resources for that. But you should have an appreciation that this type of telemetry and the kind of remediation probably goes to the server group or the UC team. So this is quite different than a dialogue you'd have with the internal groups that are administering to endpoints or even network. John, do we have a couple questions? Anything? Okay.
No, no questions. They can see the presentation, so we're good.
Perfect. So that's a very high level of server health. Conference call history. So this is the second of the third topic that we were going to cover today. So some of the things I hope to show you is, completed call analytics, the ability to search, global search. So if I pop back to my screen share, hopefully everything here will. So here's where I wanted to be for conferences. So this once again is a starting point. However, we have the ability to drill into completed calls and then conference call history. So you're starting to see how Prognosis essentially pulls the details, stitches everything together, and starts displaying it in tabular form for you. However, we have the ability to drill into a specific call, and this would be call ID 2135. And the reason this kind of view is very interesting, at least from an administrator's standpoint, is you can see here there's 3 folks on this conference call. And this fellow, Oliver, was having some issues. And you can see that there's multiple threads to the front end from Oliver. And that's quite different from Minaj and Michelle. So the point being here is one of the things we're trying to do in terms of the conference numerics is determine whether there's an issue with one person or with multiples, or it's a more broadly affecting end users an issue. So we had this in real term. We recently deployed Prognosis for someone on site, and a manager, a vice president actually, was the originator of a conference. And everyone thought the conference was going poorly, but in actuality, it was the one manager who was using a less than optimal mix of technologies. And that led everyone else to believe that there was infrastructure issues, when in fact it was very much like this attendee, Oliver, who was on and off and on and off. We have the ability to drill into any one of these streams here, and this will pull up a display like this, right? So the kind of things we learn from what we're pulling back is, here is Oliver's ID, and he was on this endpoint. So if we have WMI access to that endpoint, we could drill into that. We can tell whether they're wired or on VPN. We're also seeing the stats about when Oliver joined and when it was terminated here, 40 seconds. We also see here that an edge server was involved, which tells us it was remote. He was a remote attendee. The other thing that we see here is we can hover over this here, and we start getting statistics in each direction around the min-MOS, because that's really what matters. You could have a great average MOS, but you're, as an end user, you're going to experience the worst of that situation. So we want to understand what the min-MOS was, and then, of course, we get the statistics from Microsoft that tells us latency, jitter, packet loss, and so on that comprise that. Same with this direction here. So one of the things that we have in prognosis is linkage to path insight, and this gives us a deeper understanding of what's going on in terms of the infrastructure. So we have the ability to click on a hop, and it will take us over to the device and the interface that was carrying that traffic. But in actuality, this port is not having any problems, so that was not Oliver's problem. So this is a bit of a teaser here. As John and I mentioned from the onset, we're probably going to have a deeper dive into Path Insight. As you can imagine, we have visibility across many devices, and we'll have a webinar specifically that digs into the details of network monitoring. And remember when I said server, network, endpoint. So we're going to save that for a little later. If I return back to the details of this conference call, though, I can see here that we did get a 52093, and this tells us the signaling session was terminated due to loss of network. So essentially, this person, Oliver, was off campus, and they were using an unreliable network, and this is why this one individual was falling off and coming back on. So once again, this is an education and a dialogue and a user experience discussion, and what is helpful is to essentially identify those end users who appear to be habitual offenders and give them a little bit additional education and hand-holding to make sure that they're making wise choices in their computing. So I think this is something we've gone over in previous webinars, more at an academic level, but you can't underestimate the value of educating and making sure our end users are going to be successful as an endpoint and as a UC user. So once again, the mindset is there anything wrong with my servers? Is there anything wrong with my network? Is there anything unusual about the way that endpoint is working? So that being said, no other questions yet. I'm going to go back to the slides.
Questions,
John?
Dave, I have a question for you, though. Can you go back to your screen share?
Absolutely.
I know we're talking specifically today about Skype for Business, but I noticed also on the right or left-hand side you have Cisco and Avaya over there. Mm-hmm. Is that because you can monitor all three from the same screen?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things I neglected to show you was we have a global search here, and I'm just putting in a qualifier here, which limits the amount of databases we have to search. So I should be able to put in Skype users Terry, and hopefully, oops, it should be link users Terry, because it should be much quicker than that. There we go. So if I'm looking for a specific individual, and this is not uncommon when someone comes in on Monday and say, I had a poor experience on Friday, this gives us a chance to find Terry here. So this will pull up some of the recent activity from Terry, and you'll notice it's a historical view, and remember this segment of the presentation is conference history. We have a DVR function that allows you to essentially navigate forward and back in time. So I could either drag this button here, or we can go back by period or let it roll until we find something that we're looking for. But in this case, I can drill into Terry's details here, much as we did before, and this should render a page very much like what we what we saw in the previous details. And we're pulling all this from Sydney here. I'm waiting for it to come in.
Yeah. I just want to point out that our savvy audience will probably realize that that question that I asked was sort of a loaded question because we knew the answer. And the point is that that our product called Prognosis can monitor not just Skype for Business, but also all the other components in your environment. And the reason that's important is that most of our customers, in fact, almost every one of our customers, is migrating from some previous platform, from some legacy system. And the benefit of having a tool that monitors all those things from a single pane of glass is very obvious, is that you can monitor your system as you're sunsetting one environment and bringing up another. And so now I've spoken long enough to see the screen refresh, so now it's Dave's turn to talk. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'm coming back. It is the demo environment. So what I'm trying to pull up here is a voice quality 360 view, and that's something unique to Prognosis. And the fact that where John would really like me to land is this illustration here.
Right there.
That shows Terry, a Skype user, carrying traffic on an audio stream to a Sonos SBC, to an audio codes, over to a Cisco device and back. And all of these are clickable in terms of I could drill into this Cisco endpoint, I could drill into this segment here, I could drill into the audio codes SBC Sonos, take a look at each of the channels, and that might be something for another time. John?
Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that. As Dave mentioned, we are going to have a follow-up webinar in about a month called Troubleshooting 201, where we'll go a little bit deeper on some of these details.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're on. We have one more area here that we want to show you, which is pretty exciting. So this is the conference call in flight. So what we're trying to illustrate to you is, now that we've taken a look at a historical view, what do things look like in flight, right? So if I come back here to the beginning, just to the home screen here. So let's just start here. You'll notice that we navigated through a completed calls. So this is a historical view where we ended up with the DVR function. But over here is where we get active calls. Now, please keep in mind that Prognosis differentiates calls from conferences. And so we are seeing
Dave, you're not showing your Dave, you're not sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On slides. There we go.
I'm sorry. Let me start over.
Question came in, what version are we demonstrating?
This is our 10.0 for Prognosis version.
10.5, right? Yeah.
No, this is 10.4 actually.
Oh, 10.4. Okay.
Yeah. So we do have 10.5 now, and like I said, I'd love to show you that, but that's in our production, and I can't show you that at the moment. But hopefully next webinar we'll be able to show you some enhanced screen. If the question is about versioning, this could be Link 2013 or Skype for Business. Okay.
Right.
So I'll backtrack a little bit since I wasn't showing it, but you'll see on this screen. Go ahead,
Dave. One thing that we should point out is that if you're going to do the in-flight call quality, you need to have the Wave 16 client to see that, which is the Office 2016 client, as well as SDN API deployed in your environment.
Correct. And I think, John, didn't we have a few sessions on the SDN API on previous webinars?
Yes, yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, Dave, because if you haven't had a chance to see some of our previous webinars, at the end of this slide, there's actually a link to the ones that are archived, and you can certainly go back and take a look at some of those earlier ones. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, there's a specific one on the SDN API, and at a very high level, the SDN API, or now called interface, can be downloaded from Microsoft. You essentially deploy listeners to front ends where we collect atomic data. It gets aggregated on a role called a manager, and then Prognosis becomes a subscriber to that manager. So that's the call flow that you're seeing here. And the way that we surface that here, and as John pointed out, we really want to emphasize it does require the Skype 16, Skype for Business, Office 16 client, because there's a good point of confusion You can still deploy SDN, but you don't get the full range of metrics that we're about to show you unless you've got that total mix of technologies. So as I said but didn't show you, here are the completed calls, which represents the link to our historical view. But these are calls that are currently underway. So within these, and of course I always told John in our prep that subject to whatever is running at the time here in terms of our demo environment, we only have one conference here, and that's active. The rest of them are active calls. But you see we do get telemetry from that, so I'm going to click on that. And if my demo environment behaves properly, I'm going to start seeing some metrics. So Carol obviously has the 16 client. So I have the ability to click on that little bar, and you're getting the in-flight telemetry. So I don't have to wait for that call to complete. The benefit here is you may have someone who knows how to reach help desk, and they may be experiencing something on a conference call and be curious as to whether it's just them or is it something happening across the board. So when you have multiple attendees here, as you see, Booty is just coming in, we can see that there is something that is occurring across all these environments. So you can see that it's connected properly, latency, all those underpinning metrics are good. However, you see this is affecting both Carol and Booty. Yes, John?
Yeah, I was going to say the reason this chart continues to update is because it is pulling data in real time, and we get sample data from the Microsoft environment about every 30 to 45 seconds. And so when the product pulls that information, you can see it just updated there. It'll be able to provide metrics for all the people on the call. And you know, if the call degrades, you'll see it get bad. If something were to happen in real time, you were able to fix something in real time, you'll actually see the call quality get better. So
yeah, that's an important point. No, that's a really good point, John. And the way this would reflect the performances is going to be if there are certain thresholds that are crossed. Like John said, if the min-moz was to come up for a certain polling time segment, that might go into poor, fair, or good. So I would love to show you what we have going on in production because we do have a 16 client deployed quite readily in our environment. And it's very interesting to see the folks who are remote versus on campus and this kind of thing. So any other questions on this? No? Okay.
No questions have come in.
All right. Let's see. Did I cover everything that we had in here? Yeah, I covered Path Insight on the previous one. So, yeah, we covered it both in real time and also in the historical. Okay, John?
Thanks, Dave. Okay.
Sure.
So, the next slide is really about some of the features that Microsoft has actually put into the box. And so, and as we mentioned at the top of this call, both Dave and I are Microsoft alum, and Microsoft would love it to be everybody in the world is going to move to Skype for Business, and maybe at some point they will. But and Microsoft has acquired, as many of you may know, some technology from a company called Event Zero. And they've taken that technology now and made some of it available out of the box, or will soon have it available out of the box, which for customers it's a good thing because it provides more metrics for people that are investing in Skype for Business, and we applaud that effort. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot more to unified communications system than just the Microsoft tools. So the rest of the world is a little bit more complicated. And so when you work in an environment where you're taking your legacy system maybe and moving it over to Skype for Business, or just blending the two because of an acquisition, it's important to have a tool that can cover the rest of the world. And so that's where the out-of-box experience with Skype plus the information that we provide gives you a broader picture of what's going on in your environment. And the analogy I like to make, and for those of you who've listened to these webinars in the past, I'm probably going to hear this again, but I like to make the analogy between a dictionary and a novel. In a dictionary, all the words that are in the novel are in a dictionary, but you don't see people sitting by the fireplace thumbing through a dictionary because it doesn't tell a story. It just provides data or information. On the other hand, a product like our product, which is Prognosis UC for Unified Communications, actually tells a story. It tells you what's happening in your environment. And in Troubleshooting 201, you'll actually see at the end of that drill down, you'll actually get a prescriptive description of what's happening in your environment and steps to take to mitigate any of those problems that are occurring. So think about, when you're thinking about your environment and how you're going to monitor and protect it and maintain it, think about all the other components that make up your environment, not just the Skype for Business pieces, but your SBCs, your endpoints, your headsets, everything that's involved in the entire ecosystem, we can monitor from a single pane of glass. Okay, that's the point I wanted to make. So we're moving a little fast today, Dave. So we're about halfway through and we're almost done with our slides. And so if you have any questions in the audience, please feel free to type them in or let us know what you would like to hear more about. And if you have any suggestions that you would like to see in our next webinar, also please add those into the feedback from the audience. But now we're at our Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them in. Dave, do you have anything you want to add?
Not other than I hope we showed you just a portion of the picture. And then, like I said, what we attempt to do is, in subsequent webinars, give you a deeper look into the endpoints and, as we said, the devices that are being used and their performance. There's also a pretty big consideration, I think, on the network side, and this is where Path Insight comes in. This will give us a little bit depth visibility into OSI layer 2, 3, 4. I'll be honest with you, I've deployed Prognosis in the last 2 days with a couple customers, and they're kind of surprised at what they see coming out of the network statistics. And I left them under a heavy dose of investigation. And I'm sure we also have maybe some topics on our testing. So we have the ability to do some outside-in testings for essentially what they call a ring-out test, also call trees, what they call a drill, and we also have capacity stress test and heartbeat. So
we'll be showing that, right, in the next one.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll be showing that in 201. A question did come in. It says, this looks like a great product, and I agree, but how does it compare with CA-UCM tool? Are you familiar with
I'm not overly
tool?
familiar with CA-UCM.
Okay, so
all the competitors.
Yeah, so for whoever submitted that question, it's a great question. I don't know if we'll be able to answer it in today's call, but at the end of this session, you'll see our email aliases. They're really easy. It's our first name dot last name at IR.com. Please feel free to email us that question, and I'll do a little bit of research. I'll hand it off to our folks down in Sydney, Australia. They can give you some detailed response. Also, if you notice on the screen, there are some links to additional resources, and I like to leave these up because they are, we've used these in previous webinars, and they're really great tools that are available. Most of them are directly from the Microsoft website. In fact, all of them are. So if you haven't made an investment yet in Skype for Business and you're looking to do so, there's some great information here. For client awareness and readiness resources, there's a thing called the RASC kit, which is the Rollout and Adoption Success Kit. It's a little dated, to be honest, because most of it is focused on Link, but if you do a search and replace with Link and Skype for Business, it pretty much applies to what's going on. And there's a rollout plan tool there. So a couple more questions, have come in. One of them is, can this app capture monitoring information from SFB servers and Microsoft dedicated environment? Yes, Skype for Business service in a dedicated environment. Dave?
Yeah, the point being here is, and I didn't pull up our logical diagram, and I guess I could, John, if we wanted to.
Yeah, we have time. And while you're doing that, I'm going to answer the next question.
Yeah, please do while I pull that.
Yeah, so it says, is there any API integration with Skype for Business Online? And the answer to that is actually not yet, and that's because there isn't an actual link right now from Microsoft into the Skype for Business Online. But we are working very diligently on that. In fact, I just came from a meeting yesterday where we were talking with some of the leadership team at Microsoft about the next steps. You'll see that sort of thing come up probably in calendar year 2017 or late this calendar year. But stay tuned because we are absolutely working with them on that. And we have Prognosis VoIP Monitor 4. How do we upgrade to 10.5? Oh, okay.
Just contact us.
Yeah.
We'll make sure that happens.
Send me your contact information after the call, and we'll make sure that we can connect you to the right people to help you get the upgrade. If you have 4, it's a whole different animal, so we can talk.
Yeah.
It was mentioned that not all the features are available unless you're on Skype for Business 16 client. What features are missing if you have the 15 client? Yeah, is it only real-time call monitoring capability? That's the primary one. Yeah, but I don't think there's any other thing missing, is it, Dave?
Right, and that's what you get because one thing to realize here architecturally is it's your client that provides the metrics. They get collected on the front end, so Microsoft built in the ability to pass those metrics in real time with the Skype for Business client. So the legacy Skype clients did not basically forward that on to be collected, so we don't get those metrics until the call is complete because that's when it gets committed to the QoE and CDR database. So to kind of expand on that is if everyone sees my slide here, and I really like this, and maybe I'm a bit geeked on it, but this tells a good job of how Prognosis retrieves their information. Of course, the bottom 2 tiers are typically, just to illustrate, we invest in the leaders in the UC market here, and that's where our dev talent puts their focus, right? And of course, as John has mentioned previously, is we are vendor agnostic in terms of trying to give you a view across these platforms as very few shops are homogeneous. But the blue is the access methods for Cisco, red is our access methods to retrieve data from Avaya, and green is where the Microsoft technologies we pull our data from. So when I walk through this in Active Directory, we go against Active Directory with LDAP to get the directory user objects, right? So we need to be able to, as you saw me do a search for Terry, you could search for John or Dave, and we need to be able to tie those end user objects back to the streams that we capture. So as I mentioned, WMI is the method we use to pull the data from both servers and the endpoints. SQL is when we pull data from the LCS CDR database and QoE. And then as John just mentioned, SDN API is how we get the in-flight data. So all this is retrieved, essentially committed to our databases, and that's what we're doing for you is we use these various access methods to retrieve the data, commit it to our databases, and essentially relate the tables and the databases together to tell the story that John was talking about instead of flipping through the dictionary. As you go on up the stack there, the gray boxes are simply monitoring roles. And these are the boxes that essentially run the collectors below it there, the AD and the SDN, SQL, and so on. And so what the blue box above that is a management node. So that is where we surface or pull all this together. So we have the ability to scale out or scale up. But don't make the assumption it has to be on separate servers. Many of our customers can get away with both management and monitoring role on one server, as you see on the pop-up, the call-out on the right. One box can essentially manage up to 60,000 endpoints. And of course, the way we differentiate from some of our competitors is we don't use probes. As I explained in the green boxes, this is our access methods. And we can quickly essentially enroll, prognosis and add sites, SBCs, gateways, and then once we discover your topology, we know all about how to find our way to your SBAs and so on, all the components in there. And then, of course, the top tier is some of our integration and feature, and as I mentioned, we have a proactive testing up in the upper right-hand corner that does that. So, John?
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So a couple questions came in. One of them was a simple one, is can I get a copy of this presentation? And the answer is absolutely yes. You'll be able to, after you give us a 5-star rating on this, you'll be able to download, no, I'm just kidding. You'll be able to download the presentation. In fact, they're linked at the tail end of this deck, so you'll see all those links. So that's good. A question did come in about smart. Do we monitor the smart Skype for business rooms? And Dave, you want to answer that one?
If I'm not mistaken, Smart will still appear as an endpoint. So we would pull in all the data that we would from an endpoint. But you'd notice in our tree, if you give me just a moment to pop back here, if I expand out our stack and the high-level navigation here, we do have video, but currently it's Polycom in Tandberg. But I think in terms of Smart and the room systems, those would appear as an endpoint under the Link or Skype PBXs. That's my understanding. Okay.
And actually, I've had a conversation with the team at Smart twice, personally, and they have an API that's open that we could dial into and plug into if we had to, and we could actually customize our installation specifically for that with our consulting team. So we could do that if it was a high priority for your environment. So although it's not available out of the box, it's something that, because they have an open API, we can certainly write to it if we needed to.
Yeah, that's an important point here. Is John, I just want to add to that. What you see here in the high level navigation pane are all the things that are largely out of the box. There's a few things that are extended solutions, which means they're an add-on module. But if there is a system, we can have a conversation about how we retrieve that data and actually stitch it into the data model and reveal it, display it. As I said, that's the trick is, what story do you want to tell? Where do we source it? How do we retrieve it? Where do we commit it to? How do we correlate it? And then how do we surface it? So that would be the kind of the thought process around anything we don't have out of the box.
And I'm just going to do a plug about our development team, a shameless plug. Our development team is based out of Sydney, Australia, and they are incredibly agile. I, for a fact, witnessed an opportunity where we didn't have a feature on Friday, and we had it on Monday morning. So we can be very agile depending on the severity of the issue or the need for the feature. So we are willing to work with your organizations to customize or modify. A lot of the screens that you saw Dave show were mashups that you can actually modify the view inside of a HTML environment. So it's fully customizable. So yes, so we're not only are we agile, but we give you the tools that you can provide. We provide you the tools that you can create your own custom views. So if you had an executive view, we have an actual screen for that. So if you wanted to make sure that the very high level of your organization, your strategic leadership team, always has a great experience, you can monitor that separately from the rest of the company and things like that. So another question came in. Is what is your licensing model? Is it per endpoint, per user, et cetera? And the answer is it's per user. So a user could have multiple endpoints because we do provide multiple abilities to monitor, not just the Skype for Business environment, but as I mentioned before, the other environments. So it's really per user, right, Dave?
Yep.
Dave's closer to sales than I am. Yeah, so
but I won't quote anything. That's beyond my grade.
But if you do want a specific quote on your environment, again, I'll encourage you just to send me an email. I'm John, JOHN, .hand, HAND, at IR.com, and if, depending on where you're located, I'll connect you to the right person in the organization to get back to you. Any tools for monitoring SIP trunks? Ah, that's a good one. I think that's going to come up in the next webinar, though, right? But the simple answer is yes. But we will drill down into that in 201 a little more in more detail. So I'm going to mark that as answered. So we're at 45 minutes in. We have another 15 minutes for those of you who have additional questions. We'll hang out here for a few minutes. Dave, you brought up a screen you probably want to talk to. So what are we looking at?
And I brought this up because you mentioned Mashups. So this is another feature we have called Live Canvas. And as I mentioned, and this is why I always leave this little logical diagram up, once again, architecturally, if we're pulling in all this data here and committing it to our databases, right, it's essentially at the ready unless it's some kind of metric that's an on-demand. So this is an example of what we call Live Canvas, and we can start with any diagram you want to work with in Visio, basically turns to a SVG, and then we can pin the underlying metrics wherever you want to on the graphic. And then we can also make these clickable and drillable. So for instance, if you look closely over time, these metrics will change because, as John mentioned, we have an update cycle here that we retrieve this data. But for instance, if we want to understand, see, we just got an update. If we want to understand something more here, we can click on this and it'll take us down to those other displays because we've already, basically repurposing a display that we already have about this. So this is, although it's Cisco, it's very similar in terms of, what elements are up and running, what our processes are running, and this kind of thing. So we can essentially repurpose much of any of the frames that we see in our displays. So I'm just going to pop through a couple of these here. So
yeah, and that
hopefully these.
Yeah, the one.
Go ahead.
The one you're showing now. These are the kinds of dashboards that you see, like if you walk through an IT office and you have the big monitor screen up on the wall. You can use this as a very high level dashboard to see what's happening around the world. And you could use, we talked about Visio, but you can use virtually any photograph if you wanted to and light it up. It's just hyperlinked with the information that lights it up from underneath. It's a great tool, and this is another example actually of our ability to be agile. This feature was added in about 1 month to the product. But go ahead, Dave.
No, I wasn't going to say anything. Just
okay. So another question came in: is what is the level of integration available with ITSM?
Not sure if we've ever discussed that.
Okay. So again, what I would ask you to do then is just email that question directly to me so I can get back to you, and I will research it for you and give you an update. Okay. So yeah, so these pictures that Dave has been showing are a new feature that added. We call it Live Canvas, and it's a very handy tool.
These are just yeah, the ones that don't have an LC behind the label, they're just a mashup. And when I say just a mashup, is essentially throughout our product. If we go to any of the out of the box displays that we have, let's just go back to Microsoft. Let's see. Let's just pull up Network Hops. For instance, this display has 1, 2, 3, 4 frames, and we could add any of these, repurpose these to a new mashup. And I could say add to, create a new mashup, and I would just give it a name and see how there's a plus sign there. So I essentially add it to that new view, and this gives you an opportunity to repurpose any of the out of the boxes. So essentially, if you're tier 1, tier 2, 3, NOC, network team, desktop team, they need, let's say, 1 or 2 frames from 5 or 6 different displays. We can repurpose those and add those to mashups. Okay, that's all I was going to basically mention about mashups.
The question came in: can we monitor audio codes? And the answer is absolutely. we monitor audio codes, SBCs, as well as Sonos SBCs and a lot of other components. So yes, audio codes is definitely one of the components that we monitor.
Yep.
And so we're at 50 minutes in. Let's go back to the slides, and we'll just do some housekeeping. Keep the questions coming in. So there's our Q&A slide, and then, as I mentioned, there's a lot of resources on that slide. Our next webinar, as we talked about oftentimes in this presentation, is going to be Troubleshooting 201, and that'll be on May 26th. We'll do a deeper dive. We'll show you the path insight with greater detail. We'll talk about the soft phone metrics that you can get, and as Dave talked about, we'll show you some of our testing capabilities, especially heartbeat testing. Do you want to drill down on any of those, Dave?
No, not yet. I want to get everybody back next time around. So
yeah, it's a teaser.
I don't want to give too much away, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to segue here, so.
Exactly.
Definitely. I know this is a bit of a departure from what we've done in the past, so hopefully you find it interesting, and please give us that feedback.
So, as I mentioned multiple times, you'll get a copy of this slide deck, and when you do, all of these circles here are actually hyperlinked, okay? So if you want to get a demo, a customized demo specifically for your organization, you can click there. If you want to get a 30-day free trial, you can click here. If you want to go to our resource center and see all the other stuff that we have available, because we do other things besides unified communications, you can go here. As I mentioned also, our emails are right here, john.hand@ir.com and dave.bottomley@ir.com. So if there was a question that came up that I meant, there was a few here that we weren't able to answer live, but we'll be happy to do the research for you and get right back to you. And with that, Dave, we're just going to say thank you, unless you have any other questions that you want to type in. Again, we really appreciate you spending your time with us today. I know time is probably your most important commodity, so we do thank you for spending a bit of your time with us today. And also, please do us a favor and rate and review the webinar today. That's the only way we can make it better, so feel free to provide some feedback. Another shameless plug about Skype for Businesses. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention right there, and that comment was the feedback. We really like to hear what it is you're specifically interested in. So your feedback from the previous webinars have been shaping, some of the changes you're seeing. So we are listening, and if there are specific things you want to hear, please be explicit about what it is you want to see in future webinars.
Yeah, and in fact, this entire live environment came out of a piece of feedback that we got from an earlier webinar, because they were always, just slide decks, and that gets a little boring after a while, to be quite honest. So it's kind of nice to be able to see the product in action. So I want to thank Dave for providing us with that demo today. And again, I was going to do another shameless plug. Dave and I are both using Skype for Business right now. We're using our enterprise voice client through Skype for Business to actually talk to you through the Bright Talk interface. So we live the products. Dave did mention earlier that we are vendor agnostic, and that's all well and good for Dave, but I am not. I'm 100% Skype for Business. So for those of you who are not using Skype for Business, let's work together, and I'll help you get there.
Let's move you in a different direction.
Exactly. And it is a great environment. And to be honest, Dave and I work remotely. You might think we're in the same room, but Dave is actually in Arizona today, and I am in gray-skied Seattle area. And I couldn't even do my job without Skype for Business, because we're headquartered in Australia, and every single day I'm doing international calls and presentations, and it's a very incredible tool, and I just can't speak highly enough about it. I'm very happy to be able to provide a tool that makes that environment as productive as possible. So with that, another question came in, more of a comment. Many thanks for this. I appreciate that. Many thanks for you for attending. With that, if there's any other questions, feel free to type them in, and we'll just say thank you. That's it. Happy trails, I guess. Yep. So thank you very much. And if you have any additional questions that you didn't get a chance to type into the question box today, feel free to email me directly, and we'll get right back to you. And for that, have a great rest of your day and your week and a weekend. Take care.